Well, hello, everybody. This is a really great turnout. Thanks for being here. Thanks to you at the remote sites also for joining us today. I'm Erica Austin, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, and I want to mainly say thank you to all of you, to the Teaching Academy, to Global Campus, to Dr. Villanueva, who's going to be presenting today. We've had a great series of workshops happening about once a month through the fall. These have been by faculty, for faculty, and emerging faculty. And we are really appreciative of the range of topics that have been suggested and that have been offered, and the lunch that has been provided generously by Global Campus. For those of you who are here in the room, we can't provide it virtually. We will be continuing to provide lunch thanks to the Teaching Academy sponsoring that through the spring semester at the different workshops. So tell all your friends, and this is a great way to spend lunch and learn about something really useful that you can take back and use right away. In fact, I heard that at our last month's teaching presentation, we had some people in the room who took what they learned and used it in class that very afternoon. So we'll look forward to hearing what you're able to do with what you learned today. I need to remind you that if you have questions, and of course we encourage questions and discussion in conjunction with the presentation, make sure that you get one of these microphones so that the people at our remote sites will be able to hear your question, and we also want to make sure they can participate fully, just as you can here in the room. So it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Victor Villanueva. He is a Regents professor of English. He's the director of our writing center. He told me I'm allowed to tell you that he's been at WSU for a while now, 19 years. And so he really knows not just about writing and about teaching, he also knows about the culture of Washington State University and our students and how to reach them effectively. And that is what he is going to talk about today, that writing is doing, and how do you help them to do that in your classes. So, Dr. Villanueva.
Thank you, madam. Okay, hi. And let's see, one of you, Leslie, has heard this entire routine before. I'm not, my time is limited. I've got 50 minutes more or less, and those of you who know me knows that's not enough for me. So I was going to start out with an exercise, but I don't think I want to do that. What I'm going to do is tell you what the exercise was or would have been to get you prepared for where I'm going to go with all of this. This is, I should tell you something about what I do. Actually, I don't run the right, where's Erica? Hi. Okay, this is not against her. I don't really run the writing center. And in fact, Lisa Johnson-Schull is the one who does that. And what I direct is the writing program. And why am I making that distinction? Because one, writing program handles assessment as well as the writing center, and WAC and WID. And I don't know if you guys know the distinction between WAC and WID, apart from that they sound funny. WAC is writing across the curriculum. When you think about writing across the curriculum courses, something like English 101 is supposed to be doing that job. It is, what are the general principles of writing for the academy that obtain across the academy, right? That's writing across the curriculum. Part of what tends to happen in an English 101 course is learning something about the ways of the academic discourse community. And I'm going to come back to that word discourse at some point probably. Writing in the disciplines is something else very differently. Is something very different. Because then we're talking about the particular kinds of language use and argumentation that obtains for a particular discipline or set of disciplines. It's what takes us out of our expertise, those of us in English studies. See what I'm saying? We can know about rhetoric and we can know about language, but we can't know about the particular ways in which scientists, say, would marshal their arguments. We need you for that. The ways in which you marshal arguments for your own disciplines. We should work together on those kinds of things. And the main reason I'm bringing that up is because part of the principle, part of the problem that has obtained for the quarter century that writing across the curriculum, the M course, has been at play at this university. It's actually started, well, it kind of starts in 1989. 1996, we hire the first writing program director, which is Bill Condon. And I was hired in 95 to be director of composition in the English department. So he did the WAC, no, I did the WAC, he did the WID. Part of what happens, part of the reason why I'm bringing this up is that part of the grumbling that often occurs in M courses is the idea that you're being asked to do our job. And actually, we're asking you to do a part of what is already a part of your job. There is no discipline in which writing isn't a part of what you do. You have to publish. You have to do grants proposals. All kinds of writing is a part of what you do, but you think of it as transparent when it doesn't quite operate that way. So what we're asking you to do is a part of what you do. But there is an expertise we can bring to bear. I started to say something about what it is that I do. There is a funny thing that's happened historically where I have to think, do I want to get into this? And I will. Here's what happens historically. Historically, at Harvard University, which tends to dictate, if we talk about what dictates curricula throughout this country, it's Harvard, Yale, and Ann Arbor, Michigan. And when it comes to writing. Why Ann Arbor, I don't know. But nevertheless, Ann Arbor is the other, which is, by the way, where Bill Condon came from when he came here. For many years, Harvard had an endowed chair that was called the Boylston Professor of Rhetoric. The Boylston Professor of Rhetoric, that included John Quincy Adams, included Henry Adams, some big names. In the early 20th century, or late 19th, the Boylston Professor of Rhetoric changed his title to something he thought was more important. And he changed his title to the Boylston Professor of English Literature. But then he saw that there were these students that weren't quite prepared to do the writing he thought they should be doing for literature. And so he gave the job to his teaching assistant, which is the precedent that is with us to this day of having teaching assistants teach comp, which has its problems because it assumes a kind of amateurism that if you can write, you can teach writing, and that isn't always the case. Nevertheless, the Boylston Professor of English Literature created a series of English courses at Harvard. Students who looked like they could do really well would do English A. Students who couldn't quite come up to that would do English B, all the way down to English D, which correlated with the supposition of the grade that the student would get. And for those of you who know some poetry, think about Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes, probably the greatest of all American poets, was relegated to English B, which he wrote a poem about because he was a black student at Harvard at that time. Composition then, in the 1960s, because of some work that was coming out of Jerome Bruner in cognitive sciences, some work that was coming out of Vygotsky, Voloshinov, there was a lot of folks who are starting to argue what I'm going to get to in a second, which is this idea that how we come to know that language is epistemological. Right? Now, composition starts to take off. That's the one thing that happens. The other thing that happens is that there's a conference at Dartmouth between professors of English and teachers of English in America and teachers of English in England, and we come to realize that they were doing things very different from what was going on here. So composition starts to take off on its own. But composition, as I said, started out as some sort of menial labor that amateurs could do. And that attitude isn't completely gone when you look at the amount of non-tenure track faculty that are hired to teach writing. So what composition had to do was attach itself to something that would legitimate it more and that would not be British literature. And what it did was it attached itself to rhetoric, which is technically, and there's a reason why I say technically, which we can get back to or not, 2,500 years old, beginning with Corax of Syracuse. So, what is it that I do? There's this funny thing that we call a single discipline, rhetoric and composition. Composition itself is less than 100 years old. Rhetoric is 2,500 years old. I am mainly a rhetorician, but that's much of what my work has been, but deeply tied to rhetoric's influence on the teaching of writing. Composition for me, even though it's a noun, acts as a verb. It is the doing, and rhetoric is also. All right, so now if this were going to be, if you guys weren't chomping on pizza, and if it weren't faculty, and if I wasn't so limited on time, this is what I would ask you to do. But here's so that you know what the exercise is. I would ask you to write a word, any word, and put it on the top left-hand corner of your page. All right, you with me? Then I would ask you to write its opposite on the right. This gets very interesting disciplinarily, by the way, because I would give an example and I would say, like red and blue. And I had some student tell me that red and blue are not opposites. Well, how about red and green? No, they're not opposites either. Well, 2 words came out of my mouth after that. We'll leave it to your imagination. And then I said a word and its opposite. Right? Going back to that first word, I would ask the students to generate a list of 15 more words. Free association. And then I would ask them to do the same thing on the right, 10 words. You remember this, Leslie? 15 years ago. All right. Then there would be 27 words in front of you, and I would ask you then to use 25 of those words to compose a poem. Not adding any words. This is a very interesting thing to do in front of students, or to have students do. And I've done this from 8th graders to faculty over the last 20 years or so. Now, in a group of, say, 25, my average size classroom, 20 will be actively engaged in trying to create that poem. 4 or 5 won't, and I want to come back in a second to why that would be the case. Right? At some point I will say, now, that takes about 15, 20 minutes, which is why I'm not doing it. 15 to 20 minutes to let the students try to figure out how to compose the poem using those 25 words and nothing but those 25 words. No helping words. Changing form if they have to, like you could change dance to dancing. But only those 25 words. After about 15 to 20 minutes, I tell the students to cut 5 words out of their poem and adjust accordingly. That half dozen or so students that were struggling feel very relieved, and they are able then to do it. 5, 10 minutes. Then I come back and I ask them to cut 3 more words. What tends to happen at that point is I get all kinds of guff from that audience. And why is that? I'll come to that in a second. After they're finished, I'll ask them to read their poems aloud. And there's always something that can be found about what the student was thinking. In one evening class, for instance, someone wrote about wasting time. And I knew that that was somebody who really didn't want to be there. And we could talk about it. Beginning classes, I do this in an August class, and they will write about the sunshine. Another instance of not wanting to be here. But we can get at some of what they're thinking. So what's the point in that exercise? Well, the first point in that is something about how writing happens. This is a very artificial way of getting at something we can call the writing process. Now, in composition studies, in the writing end of things, there is a lot of discussion about whether there is such a thing as a writing process. No, it is like any good theory, an oversimplification. I mean, the best theories are really how to embrace really complex ideas in something simple, even if it's not simply rendered, right? So the writing process, no, of course, there are as many writing processes as there are individuals. And we have to separate out notions of writing process from writing rituals. They're two very different kinds of things. I mean, I've got my writing ritual to this day. It's when the house is always cleanest. When the dishes get cleaned, I still can't get a damn word down. Then after that, well, maybe it's time to vacuum. I still can't get a word down. I write a sentence or two. Well, maybe I just need to stop and think about this for a second, and I'll lay down, wake up an hour and a half later. And, but that's ritual. That's something different from the actual writing process. Normally with undergraduate students, I'll ask them to come up with a metaphor for their writing process. And there's a reason for that I'm going to get to. And I always give them the example of my metaphor. I have a very hard time getting started writing, but once I get started writing, there is no stopping me. And it's been very successful for me. At this point, we're one of the book disciplines, English, foreign languages, philosophy, history are the book disciplines. So our worth is counted in books because nobody's going to grant us a penny. And at this stage in my career, I've got about 50 articles, and and always, there's some scientists here. I look at scientists' CVs, and they have 200, 300 articles, but they're not the same thing as our articles. Trust me. So I've done okay, but my process, I tell the students, is constipation and flow. I mean, it's a crappy metaphor, but it works. I earned that groan. I have a very hard time getting started. Once I get started, I'm going. And it used to be when I was an undergraduate, like so many students would say, I write best under pressure. And that's not true. You don't write best under pressure. What happens is you write when there's pressure. And that's a very big difference. The best writing includes a lot of revising. So with this process, what did I have students do? First, I had them do a free generation of ideas. That's how writing starts. You start writing by writing. Free generation of ideas. And then I had them compose. Think about that word, compose. Compose only means putting this with that. Think of compost, for instance, this with that. So they put this with that. Then I had them do a decidedly artificial version of revision. In this case, just cutting things out. What we don't do, because it's impossible with this kind of a poem, is editing, which is different from revision. Very significant. A very significant difference. What we do here in the Writing Center is try to work students through mainly revision, not editing. We're not a comma garage. We're not a place where you come in, we punch out your commas, and the paper is all good. You know? Now, once we get this thing installed, this, what's it called? This software package that's going to... Huh? No, it isn't. Authenticate isn't the one we're using. Turnitin is the one we're using. Yeah, once we get Turnitin in, it has a pedagogical function. I mean, it can be used as a simple gotcha mechanism to catch students cheating, which is really a problem because not all cultures recognize it, and we're not very good at teaching those cultures that don't understand what we're about with plagiarism. And some cultures even believe that the idea of intellectual property is itself wrong, as in morally and ethically wrong. But we just assume that it is perfectly correct. So this idea of plagiarism, it's a complicated subject. I know. She already warned me she'd be walking out, that I'm not to be offended. Damn. All right. But the other thing that's going to happen with Turnitin is that it has an editing function. Because editing, I mean, it's still not going to be right. And if you're an actually proficient writer, you're going to mess around with your editing, not just follow rules. But the editing function can be handled. What we deal with mainly is revision. So it's an artificial revision process. And then finally, the students are asked to publish. This is a thing that you have to understand. I'm sorry, you don't have to understand. Here's something I want you to know. All of you as professionals have to publish. You have a very clear idea of what that means. Out to a journal, blind reviewed, external reviews, corrections, revise and resubmit if you're lucky. And you learn something from the revision process and you send it out again. But that word publish only means go public. The minute it comes off of your desk and onto someone else's eyes and mind, it is now published. Psychologically, for students, this is a very big thing, to recognize that every time they turn in their papers to their peers or to us, they are publishing. They have gone public. One of the hardest things to teach students is revision. One of the problems we have with the M course right now is that we mandate multiple drafts. And what we were trying to do with that is to institute a revision process. But revision isn't quite that simple, and we'll have to deal with this over time. So, that is the writing process. But what's more important to me, and what is important and what I want to get through to you, is that part of what ends up happening is that what is going on in students' minds becomes manifest on a page. And that there is nothing that we can do that doesn't include language. Let me do this thing. Try to get, and I'll do a couple of other things too. So what do you see? Underwear. A martini glass. What else? A message type envelope. Yeah. Anything else? I mean, look, I'll tell you something about this thing. That's supposed to be closed. That's supposed to be a circle. I have done this diagram in Korea with GIs. What they tended to see, first and foremost, everybody sees the martini. When I've done this at a late night class, they've seen only the martini. When I did this with the GIs, they saw two things. One, the crotch shot, the idea of underwear. And in fact, I had a student, an adult student in a class, complain to my chair that I was drawing dirty pictures in class. She kind of missed my point, but that's okay. I showed him what the picture was, and he told me he thought I could do better than that. In Korea, they saw the crotch shot, and they saw what we call the kimchi cabinet. The kimchi cabinet was a drawer for an amp and two doors to put in speakers. Can you see it? In the Bible Belt, I spent a year teaching in Auburn. I got Christ ascending. Can you see it with the cloak, arms outspread, rising up? Interesting, isn't it? I taught in Flagstaff, Arizona for about 8 years. The Hopi students always saw sunrise over a mesa. In Kansas City, Missouri, and only in Kansas City, Missouri, I got a shirt pocket. Western type shirts with the flap and the button. What's my point in all of this? We make sense of our experiences by way of language. I mean, it doesn't matter what if I talk about what rhetoric is the art of persuasion. But when are we not involved in rhetoric? When have the wonders of science, how could they have been accomplished if we couldn't communicate with each other? If we couldn't persuade a group to join together, to undergo a particular enterprise, to ask a certain question, to address a question in a certain way. How we make sense of, look, no experience is ever repeated. No experience is ever repeated. No experience is ever repeated. Now, I love watching the people's faces when I do this thing. What happens the first time? I say it and you say, heavy, Socrates. Yeah, I get this shit. You know? Because it actually is a Socratic thing about stepping into the same stream twice. No one steps into the same stream twice. It's the same idea. But what happened the second time? Well, the second time, it was not the same experience that you had the first time. Second time I said it, you had to think about it differently. The third time I said it, it was completely different in how you had to think about it, because now you're starting to think about what the hell I'm up to. All right? The experience wasn't repeated. Time had passed. No way I have exactly the same timbre in my voice. The experience was never repeated. No experience is ever repeated. Or put that aside for a second. And think about clocks. I hate clocks. Think about, we are told, any anthropologists here? Good. We are told that, well, for many years, there was a lot of discussion about how many words for snow the Inuit had. 58, 60, I think now it's down to 38. And it was really interesting to me that nobody ever asked the Inuit. They were going to observe. But, all right? Well, why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that they do portmanteaus. They kind of like German, they add, their words add all the modifiers to the word. So that a word changes as you change the modifiers. So it's not, so they are unique words, but there's still a base word that's still the same. But the other reason is that snow is a very special kind of experience in an environment like Alaska. You see what I'm saying? I mean, for us, it's just a nuisance or pretty. Or if you're into the sport, you know, something to look forward to. But it isn't a part of our daily being. Just isn't. Here's another example. Our ear follicles move to the sound of dog whistles. That is, we have the capacity to hear dog whistles. We don't, but it isn't by lack of capacity, potentially. Or you spend the night writing all night long, doing nothing but drinking coffee. Used to be drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, but most folks don't anymore. I saw a physician 2 weeks ago smoking a cigarette. I couldn't believe it. Oh my God. Can you trust this guy? Anyhow, here, you know, which James brother is it? Henry, well, English folks too. Henry James, one James was a psychologist and the other one was a writer, and I forget.
Henry's the writer,
Williams the psychologist and the better writer. It was, thank you. William James once said that if it weren't for language, we'd be left in a mass buzzing of confusion. And what is he getting at? It was the psychologist who said that. So what's he getting at? Our senses are capable of all kinds of things. Spend a night on nothing but coffee, and the next morning, you got funny things going on. These little things at the corner of your eye that aren't there. Or if you stare at the wall, it starts to bubble on you. Well, what's going on here? It is, I can't say that it is. One theory is that the breaking down of mechanisms that maintain our sanity has taken place because of the fatigue, and we actually see molecular movement. I mean, there is no such thing as solid. We know that from our undergraduate classes. So we actually see, so our filters are gone. Or think about what happens in a thunderstorm when the power goes out and how profound the silence is because of all of those sounds that are going on, fluorescent lights especially, that we learn to bleep out. Or think about what you're doing when you're driving a car. Think about a stick shift. You got the radio on, you're changing gears, you got 2 feet working, you're looking all around as far as peripheral vision will allow, plus the rear view mirror. All at the same time. How much filtering is going on? How much filtering and sorting is going on? And every once in a while it breaks down, and that's a fender bender. But for the most part, we do this successfully. Plus looking at your speedometer and the like. Ever had the lights go out on your speedometer panel? Suddenly you can't drive. You're in a constant panic, especially when you see a police car. Oh my God. Mm-hmm. Here's what I'm getting at. Here's another one. Baseball. Well, let me get to that. Let me do this. Let me come back to what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is this. No experience is ever repeated. Right? And our senses are capable of doing a lot more than we give our senses credit for. In fact, it's our scientific convenience to argue about 5 senses when we know it's all synesthetic. You know that our senses bleed into one another. I mean, you know, somebody says, wow, that tastes like shit. How do you know? I mean, if you might know it empirically, but I don't want to know. My guess is that what we're talking about are senses bleeding into one another, knowing something about how a smell suggests a taste. And look at little children who will not eat ugly food. I mean, they will not, however they perceive ugly to be. And that's this whole notion of the ways in which our senses are this mass buzzing of confusion, except that we give it order. No experience is ever repeated. We know more than we allow ourselves to know sensorially. So how do we make sense of the world? Well, for us as beings, we make sense of the world with this heightened stereoscopic hearing, stereoscopic vision, the ability to see colors. We are phenomenally given to all kinds of sense experiences. We make sense of the world by saying, maybe no experience is ever repeated, but this experience is very much like that experience, and we give it a term. It's all analogy. Baseball. Tell me that 2 home runs are identical. Impossible. Different batter, different speed velocity for the ball, different hit, different trajectory. But we say that within these guidelines, this experience is very much like that experience, and we give it a word. Really 2 words, but we spell it as one. Home run. Very interesting game, baseball. Boring to watch, but I like the concept of it, of, going home. Some errors along the way, going home, as opposed to football, taking over somebody else's territory. I mean, haven't we had enough of that? Nevertheless, how we make a sense of our experiences in this world is by way of analogy. It's all metaphor. These are the metaphors we live by, which is the title of a book by Lakoff and Johnson. What we have here are a few geometric shapes, nothing more, that we have names for even. Rectangular, circle, triangle, trapezoid. Yeah? Even those we have. Any experience, the minute you have this experience, the first thing, now we have experiences that are outside of language, Lord knows. But in order to make sense of any experience, we find the language, or try to. Think about love. What the hell is that experience anyway? that's a complicated, funny one. And so how many hundreds of thousands of words have been composed to try to make sense of that experience? It's what we do. We are epistemologically driven by language, and I tell this to even 100 level students. That is, how we come to know, how we make sense of our experience in the world is by way of language. Now, might even be ontological, might even be what separates us from all other creatures. And I'm not saying language, I'm saying what we do with language. We know other creatures have language. I don't know how many damn students have written papers to me about that. I had an ornithology student tell me that black-billed chickadees not only have language, they have dialects that are regional. Which makes me think about, a black-billed chickadee's got a southern accent? Chip, chip, yow? Nevertheless, it's not language. We know, and not even the creatures that we normally talk about, apes and dolphins and the like. All creatures, if you've ever had cats in your house and watched cats with kittens, they talk to the kittens. There's a different meow, a different way of talking to the kittens. So it's not talk, it's what we do with it. We are driven by symbols. Our basic symbol system is language. It's biologically transmitted. If we can't talk, we will find some other way. Sign language. I was on a bus in Seattle as a young man and saw a couple who were obviously blind, deaf, and dumb, and who nevertheless communicated. They did a hand-touching thing. Driven by language, had to do language. They had to do, it's in us. It's what we do, inert. But look at how driven, so that's a basic symbol system, and from that we do all other kinds of symbols. Clothes, symbol for fat and hair. Glasses. I now have lenses behind my eyes because I had cataract surgery. It's so strange. I got asthma, so I keep thinking, when are they going to do this with lungs? Wouldn't that be so cool? The bionic man? Shit. Anyhow, glasses, symbols of life. Obsessed by flight. We know historically, thousands of years of being obsessed by flight, imagining angels with wings so that we could be like the birds, somehow superior to us. Eventually, airplanes and the like. We found a symbolic form to represent this thing that we were obsessed by. It's what we do, and we do it all rhetorically. There is a definition of rhetoric that comes out of Kenneth Burke that says that we are a that defines rhetoric as a symbolic means of inducing cooperation in beings that by nature respond to symbols. That by nature respond to symbols, which makes me think it's an ontology. It is what separates us from the other creatures. Not that Aristotle said rational creatures. Lord knows. Boy, that's a bad definition. If we were rational creatures, imagine how much more we could be doing. But what he meant is that we work by way of reason, but our reason is only manifest by way of language. Here's what I'm getting at with all of this, as I run out of time. Here's what I'm getting at with all of this. All of our students and all of what you do is inherently motivated by way of language. All of our students are potentially writers. Writing is simply another, not simply, complexly, but nevertheless, another symbolic form of language. We're all rooted in language. We're all given to language. We are all naturally predisposed to language. By the age of 4, we know the basics of our language. By the age of 4, before the corpus callosum is totally formed, before babies are born, you remember the soft spot in the head and the skull. That soft spot is because the brain is still being created. It's just it can't happen in the womb because then there'll be no coming out naturally. I mean, this is before cesarean. Before it's fully formed, what is our greatest function as beings? It is learning language. I was taught 2 languages before I was 7. The 2 languages are still there. For a long time, I thought I had forgotten my Spanish. Spanish was my first language. I was always in the schools in English. My job at home was to teach my parents English, which I ended up making a whole lifetime profession. Nevertheless, my mother now is suffering from dementia. She's no longer doing English. And I find my Spanish is all there. I'm still able to. I've gone back 60 years, and it's still there. This is what we do. It's in us biologically to do language. Now, what we have with writing, and it's a particularly ingenious form of discourse, alphabetic literacy, which is not to put down the others. It is to say that alphabetic literacy is pretty damn special, because what you got is a handful of symbols that can represent all of the sounds of the spoken language. in our jargon, it's a phoneme-grapheme correspondence. Our graphic system corresponds to our phonetic system. Phoneme-grapheme correspondence. Ingenious. You master 30 symbols, and you can somehow do all. Now, the other language systems, written discourse systems, are also ingenious, but in other ways. I'm thinking about ideographic and other kinds of symbol systems. Although, well, and let's not get into all of that. Our students, when students say they don't know what to write, what they are saying is they don't know what you want them to write. Those students, that half dozen or so students that refuse to take part in the exercise that I started out with, it is because of something that's happened to them in their education. The greatest cause of writer's block is a perception of language, of written discourse, as sets of inflexible rules, rigid rules and inflexible plans. It comes from a guy named Mike Rose. Rigid rules and inflexible plans. They don't know what I'm after, and they don't know the rules for writing a poem with 25 words and no helping words at all. They are blocked for that reason. What you can do in any M course, in any course, is become clear for yourself that everything that you do involves some form of language, and any discipline and any faculty in any discipline is perforce given to writing. What are the rules, loosely conceived, that obtain for the writing for your discipline? You are language people, all of y'all are, because you are people. You are writing people, all of you all are, because you're professionals in a profession that requires writing, all of you. You have an expertise, something about the writing that happens in your discipline. And all of your students are potentially writers. If we think about writing as opposed to correctness, and this correctness thing is very messy anyway. I still cannot split infinitives. My students don't even know what infinitives are. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say split infinitives? Huh? To boldly go. Yeah, Gene Roddenberry, single-handedly responsible for the doing away of that rule. Yeah, the split infinitive, which is a very interesting rule, because that rule came into place when Latin was the language everyone spoke. And in Latin, like in almost all Romance languages, the infinitive is a single word, bailar, to dance. The minute we translate it, we have two in a word. And so the rule was put into place that said you cannot split it, because we're going to treat it as one word, as if English were Latin, except English isn't Latin, English is English. The one that really gets me is two negatives imply a positive. Have you guys all heard that rule? Do you ever realize how nonsensical that rule is? If I said, ain't no way, you're not saying, oh, I'm glad you're agreeing. Bullshit. Two negatives never implied a positive in language. It's a mathematical function. 18th century, the British decided that geometry would be the big rule, whereas France decided that language would be. And geometrically, -2 plus -2 equals -4. It's a positive in function. -2 times -2 equals +4. It's a positive in function. Mathematically, two negatives imply a positive. Linguistically, no way. Ain't no way. Ain't no way, no how. The more negatives you put in, the more emphasis that this is negative. Yeah? All right. I saw you walking around. I'm being told that it's almost 1 o'clock, and I'm being told behind me too. Here's what I'm getting at. There is an expertise that obtains in the writing program. It is something about how academic discourse looks in a writing across the curriculum mentality. What is the discourse. And what a discourse means is it's more than the jargon, is the ways in which language is used within a community. Right? That's different from rhetoric. Rhetoric is the umbrella term. So rhetoric is the art of persuasion. But how that persuading gets done is different based on different cultures and different languages and different disciplines and different communities. So you know your expertise is the discourse of your community. Our expertise is something a little larger, the kind of broad rules that obtain within the academy. Our other expertise is to think about language as language, whereas you're busy thinking about other things. Together, the writing program and you can work to create a writing in the disciplines course that will work for you. Your students can do it. You're not being asked to do anything extra. You are alive and working in part as a human, and that necessarily means that you have an expertise in language, if only you'll recognize it. And your students do too. What we would do then is work together to think about how to do this more effectively, not necessarily efficiently. There is no efficiency to writing, but more effectively. Otherwise, man, please keep doing what you're doing, because how we come to know, how we come to learn is by way of language. And why written language in particular? Because if you think about the differences between thinking and talking and writing, what there is a greater amount of discipline. In this case, I'm not talking academic disciplines. Discipline involved. Think about how many times you have known exactly what you were going to write until you sat down to do it. Because it's all nice and you're not ordering it up there. Yeah, I'm thinking about this shit and that shit and the other shit. And then you sit down to write it and it has to be ordered. And something happens. It becomes a mode of learning. The writing is so important to what you do in any discipline, because it is another pedagogical tool as well as a learning instrument. And on that, I better shut up.
Thank you. Can we give Victor a hand?
I got to erase the dirty picture.
You probably should. That was very interesting. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rebecca Vandevoort, Associate Director of the Global Campus. I do want to thank my Global Campus staff for their time in helping facilitate this workshop and get the pizza in and all that stuff. And I wanted to let you know we plan to have 4 more of these in the spring. I think Erica mentioned that, but upcoming topics are academic integrity, assessment, teaching first-generation students, and I don't remember the 4th one. But we'll be sending out announcements starting in January. I will actually put together a spring schedule, so instead of just hearing about them one at a time, we'll put together the spring schedule. Thank you all very much for attending. If any of you are interested in perhaps leading a faculty-led workshop, or if you have topics or ideas that you would really like to see us present on, please send me an email, bvandevoort@wsu.edu, and we'll see what we can do. Thanks.
And I thank you all for listening.